The room was quiet enough to hear breath slow down. A man sat close, too close, thinking proximity was power. He talked fast, filled the air, tried to dominate silence. Across from him, nothing moved, no threats, no warning, just stillness. Then it happened. Fingers drifted, almost politely, toward a hidden knife. Not a lunge, a test. In that instant, the balance snapped. Arrogance mistook patience for weakness. Calm read intention. The hand moved first, and the outcome was decided before the man realized he had crossed the final line. The knife never cleared the cloth. A small sound did it, soft, deliberate, wrong for the moment. Not a shout, not a gun. Just the slow click of a match, struck like someone had all the time in the world. The flame kissed tobacco, and the room tightened. The hitman hesitated, because fear was supposed to be loud. Fear was supposed to plead, to bargain, to panic. But Bumpy didn't. He inhaled like this was routine, like the danger was already measured and filed away. Smoke slid between them, a thin curtain. The hitman's confidence wobbled. He expected a victim. He got a man studying him, calm as a judge. And somewhere beyond that door, Bumpy seemed to be counting footsteps. That tiny click wasn't bravery. It was information. It said he'd seen this before, and the next move belonged to him already, now. Harlem was never just streets and buildings. It was memory, reputation, and rules written without ink. Every corner listened. Every doorway remembered who walked through and who didn't walk back out. Men thought they came here to settle private business, to make quiet problems disappear. They were always wrong. Nothing stayed private in Harlem. A single mistake could travel faster than a siren, carried by whispers, looks, and sudden closed doors. This wasn't a room anymore. It was a board, and pieces were already moving. The hitman believed this was a simple transaction between two men. He didn't understand jurisdiction. He didn't understand that power here wasn't loud, wasn't rushed, and never belonged to outsiders. What he reached for wasn't just a knife. It was permission he didn't have. And Harlem noticed. Whatever happened next wouldn't end with a body or a breath. It would set a tone, a reminder, a message delivered without speeches. By the time the city exhaled again, everyone would know the balance had shifted, and no one present could stop it once the verdict began. He thought speed was power, that if his hand was faster, everything else would fall into place. That was the first error. Harlem didn't reward speed. It rewarded position. While he measured distance to a throat, he ignored the space around him. Who owned it? Who controlled the exits? Who had already been alerted by nothing more than a delay? Bumpy understood something the hitman never did. Violence was only effective when it arrived last. The man across the table was loud inside his own head, convinced surprise was still on his side. He didn't see the invisible lines tightening. Loyalty didn't need uniforms here. It moved through favors, debts, and quiet understanding. By the time his confidence hardened into resolve, he was already late. He believed this was a contest of reflexes. It wasn't. It was a lesson in jurisdiction. He brought a weapon into a place that answered to memory, not fear, and every second he mistook calm for hesitation, the trap closed without a sound. The mistake wasn't drawing steel. It was assuming the room was empty when it was already full of consequences and witnesses without faces everywhere. The danger didn't accelerate his pulse. It slowed his thoughts. In moments like this, noise fell away and only order remained. He noticed the man's breathing, the slight tremor in confidence, the impatience leaking through bravado. Fear didn't visit him. It never had. What arrived instead was clarity. Violence, to him, was a tool you reached for only after everything else had failed. Consequences were different. Consequences were constants. They arrived whether you moved or not. He understood that silence could weigh more than a threat, that stillness could make reckless men confess with their hands. He had lived long enough to know most killers defeated themselves before striking. Time was the blade he sharpened. Each second the man hesitated, the outcome became cleaner. Bumpy wasn't deciding whether to act. He was selecting the exact moment the lesson would land. In Harlem, control wasn't proven by how fast you struck, but by how long you could wait while danger sat inches away. The room felt small to the other man. To Bumpy, it felt familiar. A place where patience turned into authority, and authority into something final. Nothing about the moment surprised him. It confirmed a pattern he trusted, one where restraint always forced reckless men to reveal themselves completely at last. This didn't begin with a hand drifting toward steel. It began days earlier, quietly, with conversations that sounded like nothing. Names were checked, then checked again. Schedules confirmed. Loyalties brushed, pressed, verified. Bumpy never rushed a decision. He arranged inevitability. By the time the man entered that room, doors had already learned when to stay closed. Messages had already moved without being written. Faces on the street knew when to look away. He understood threats as systems, not moments. Remove the system and the threat collapses on its own. The hitman believed he was improvising. In truth, he was following a path cleared for him, step by careful step. Every exit had a witness. Every delay had a reason. Help was close enough to arrive, far enough to remain invisible. What looked like restraint was coordination. What felt like mercy was timing. The knife wasn't a surprise, it was a confirmation. Long before the room went quiet, the outcome had been agreed upon by people the hitman would never see. The fight he thought he was starting had already finished forming elsewhere. All that remained was the moment it would reveal itself, cleanly, without spectacle, the way power prefers to operate when it knows it cannot be challenged anymore. It reduced him from danger to inventory, a variable logged and neutralized before anyone noticed tension, because preparation made panic unnecessary, and patience ensured consequences would arrive quietly, precisely, and on terms he never controlled or understood fully ever again there. Time didn't announce itself with clocks or alarms. It pressed in quietly, measured in favors called and doors not answered. The hitman felt ahead of schedule, mistaking silence for freedom. He didn't know a deadline had already been set. Not days, hours. Each pause tightened the circle. Each choice to wait erased an option. Harlem worked best this way, unseen and efficient. Bumpy understood that pressure didn't need noise, it needed certainty. While the man calculated angles and exits, the city calculated him. Cars changed routes, phones stopped ringing. Rooms that welcomed him yesterday went dark. What felt like patience was compression. Every minute he stayed visible shortened his future. He still believed control meant movement, that action could outrun consequence. But time had shifted sides. The longer nothing happened, the less could be done. By the time suspicion finally surfaced, it was already late. The net wasn't closing fast, it was finished closing. When the countdown reached 0, there would be no confrontation, no chase, no dramatic escape. Just a realization, arriving too late, that time had been the sharpest weapon in the room, and it had been counting without mercy from the moment he stepped into Harlem. No one warned him, because warnings waste time, and time had already decided how this night would end for him alone there then. The blade hovered long enough to tell the truth, not about intent, but about fear. In that sliver of hesitation, the threat stopped being leverage and became evidence. The room shifted. What was meant to intimidate now explained everything that followed. Bumpy didn't reach for it, he let it speak. A man who carries steel into a quiet room has already decided his ending, whether he knows it or not. The knife confessed to impatience, to trespass, to a belief that force could rewrite rules older than him. Calm answered without words. The power flipped, not with movement, but with recognition. The hitman felt it then, the way certainty drains color from a moment. He was never hunting, he was verifying a sentence already passed. Violence didn't need to arrive loudly, it only needed permission, and the blade had offered it freely. From there, everything became procedural. Lines crossed were acknowledged, boundaries enforced, consequences released like a sealed file opened at the right time. The city didn't need spectacle to understand what happened next. Control was maintained, order restored. And in the silence that followed, the man finally understood the worst truth of all. The knife hadn't failed him. It had identified him, and identification was enough to end everything he thought he was doing here tonight. No applause followed, only the heavy acceptance that judgments in Harlem arrive quietly, complete, and irreversible, leaving no appeal, no witness, and no doubt about who commanded the ending that night alone forever remembered. Nothing exploded. Nothing needed to. By morning, Harlem already knew, not through headlines or sirens, but through absence. A name stopped opening doors. A reputation evaporated between conversations. Men who spoke yesterday chose silence today. That was how judgment traveled here. Quietly, accurately. The lesson didn't arrive with bruises on display. It arrived with empty chairs and unanswered calls. The enemy wasn't paraded. He was diminished, reduced to a cautionary pause in other men's sentences. Respect returned to its place without demanding attention. Bumpy never claimed credit. He didn't have to. Order speaks louder when it doesn't announce itself. People understood the difference between aggression and authority. One begs to be seen. The other doesn't care if it's noticed at all. Restraint, backed by certainty, erased the noise completely. What lingered wasn't fear, but clarity. Lines were redrawn, boundaries restored. The city adjusted, the way it always did, absorbing correction and moving forward. No celebration followed, only balance. And balance was the point. Because in Harlem, justice wasn't about spectacle or rage. It was about knowing exactly when to stop and making sure everyone else learned why stopping mattered. That understanding settled deep, reinforcing a code where dignity outlasted violence and silence carried consequences longer than any shouted threat ever could in this city. It wasn't about the man who walked in with steel. It was about reminding Harlem how things stayed standing. Rules here survived because they were enforced without shouting. Bumpy understood that legacy is built in moments people don't see, when restraint corrects chaos and leaves no debris behind. What happened settled into memory as guidance, not legend. Men adjusted their behavior. Outsiders recalculated their courage. The lesson traveled farther than violence ever could because it carried understanding instead of fear. Power, used sparingly, lasts longer. The loud move draws attention. The quiet one redraws the map. Harlem remembered that night not for what was done, but for what wasn't needed. That was the warning. That was the respect. A hand reaching first had taught the final rule: patience governs force, and certainty ends arguments before they begin. Long after the knife was forgotten, the rule remained, intact and unquestioned, waiting for the next man who believed noise was strength and silence was weakness. It lingered as instruction, shaping futures quietly, ensuring balance returned whenever arrogance tested the city again at all.